Welcome to the Labyrinth. I am your host, Pratham Pado. If you would like to support this podcast, you can buy my t shirts. The link to purchase my t shirt is in the description. These t shirts can be shipped to any part of India. My guest today is the iconic Jason Bassler. He's the co founder of the influential Free Thought Project and the founder of The Police. Jason, welcome to the Labyrinth.
Thanks so much, man. I appreciate you having me on, and thanks for the kind words as well.
So, how are you? How does it feel to be a father to two young children?
It's challenging, man. Yeah, every day is a different story. You caught me on a good day today. I'm feeling pretty good. So, 2 days ago, I did an interview and I barely got any sleep, and I felt like my brain was offline the entire time. So, today I'm actually feeling a little more coherent.
What's up with your t-shirt? I can only see the top part of the t-shirt. Is that the virus? What is that?
Establishment media infecting minds with fear, hate, ignorance all across the world. I actually got this as a gift from Gavin Nascimento. Not sure if you're familiar with him, but he's a good friend of mine.
Okay. All right. So you become a father to your second child quite recently. Has that changed your outlook of the world?
Good question, man. You know, I've been doing this for about 10 years now. Um, I think maybe some people would say yes to that question and internalize it and maybe look at it from more of like a selfish perspective. But I've been in this game. I've been trying to counter establishment misinformation for nearly 10 years. And each and every one of those years have been important to me. I've always been doing this, not necessarily just for myself, but for society, for humanity. That's where I started from. That was exactly why I got into this work. So in some ways, maybe, yeah, it's tough when I go into the grocery store, for instance, to see little small children masked, to see everybody participating in the groupthink delusions. So in some ways, yeah, I don't want my kids growing up in this world that it currently is. I'll never have my kids in masks. But largely, I'm doing this just because I believe it's the important thing to do, and because it feels right to me, and I'm very passionate about it.
I believe you live in California, right?
Yeah, correct.
And they're having very strict mandates in California. They're planning to bring vaccine mandates in schools. Uh, does this make you feel more paranoid? Are you thinking of moving out of California?
Yeah, we've been discussing it. I'm a lifelong California resident. Um, I love California in so many ways. I don't know if I could live anywhere else, to be completely honest with you. Uh, it's just getting worse and worse though here, and it's a beautiful state. The geography is gorgeous. A lot to love about California, but the state government is just making it impossible. They just recently re-implemented the mask mandates. Not sure if you happen to see that, regardless of your vaccination status. So, why don't we go ahead and just try something that hasn't worked in the past and do it again, right? And continue doing it over and over again. They also just outlawed small gas generators, which we covered this morning on the Free Thought Project. And to me, that's just, oh man, it's so arrogant, on the behalf of the state, of the local state government here. This is the fact that they feel like, well, we've centralized these power, these industries around, power and electricity. So therefore you guys have nothing to worry about. Yet we've seen, time and time again, PG&E cutting off electricity for just high winds in certain areas, certain cities, locations. And, we've seen so many natural disasters. Even this past year, we've had a bunch of fires. So to me, it's insane. It's absolutely insane. And they're just continuing to take away people's freedoms one by one, kind of like the boiling frog effect, if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't seem too many people are outraged about it. More people in our liberty circles, people online, but not so much people that I've talked to. whether it be friends or family or just people, you know, in the grocery store, for instance. It's not even on most people's radar. So yeah, we're definitely looking to move out of California. The prices are really high right now. The problem is if you do sell your house in California, you're basically going to have to find something similar in price if you're going to stay in California. Now, if you leave California, you could actually find a house that's halfway decent and actually has a little size and value to it. But the prices in California are astronomical right now as far as living conditions.
Yeah. I thought that was such a silly move to ban generators. I think they're trying to uh, just piss on agorists and people who are planning to live off the grid.
Sure. Yeah, they just banned leaf blowers, gas-powered leaf blowers, a couple months ago as well. And a lot of low-income minorities use those for, you know, just their jobs that they do. So it does seem strange to me. I guess this is all just in a push, you know, to be more ecologically friendly, but it seems very tyrannical at the same time. I guess it depends on what lens you're looking at through these topics. And I think most people through, you know, public school indoctrination, greenwashing, as they call it, have probably been more on the side to be like, wow, this is actually a good move. This is going to benefit the climate, and you know, we're going to actually make a change, a progressive step forward here to limit some of these things, while not thinking about the unforeseen consequences, which these types of bans and any type of prohibition really, you know, brings with it.
Can you, if you don't mind, can you speak a little closer to the mic? I can't hear you.
Sure, man, no problem. Oh, you know what? I had this problem with my podcast. I actually have to turn it up here a little bit. My apologies. There we go. That's probably a little better, huh?
That's much better. Yeah.
Okay. My apologies, man. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. So do you think they're going to use this climate change agenda to push their goals? Like we see the World Economic Forum guys using words like climate lockdowns, that they would have to push people all around the world back into our homes, even after the pandemic, under the guise of reducing pollution and climate change. And even the United Nations has the Agenda 21 plan, where they're planning to initiate excessive taxes on meat to reduce meat consumption. How long do you think this climate agenda is going to go to strip away our freedom and liberties?
I can't say that's a question that I've put too much thought into. You know, of course, we've seen the writing on the wall. I think we even covered the climate lockdown rhetoric that was being thrown out there. It's hard to say. You know, I can't really give you a timeline. I do know that the people have been acclimated to such lockdowns, you know, as most people have experienced off and on now for the past 2 years. So will that be easier to psychologically manipulate people into adapting once again to these lockdowns? Yes. Is it going to be a hard sell without the fear of a virus? I think that's probably the main instigator to motivate people when in these current conditions with the virus. So I don't know. You know, I think the jury is still out as far as how much people actually have bought into the climate change hysteria. The leftist media certainly tried to push it pretty hard, but there's still a significant portion of the right and even centrists who don't necessarily believe in it. And there's so many conflicting opinions with the experts, you know, quote experts, that it doesn't seem outside of the mainstream media that there's a consensus that it is something that we really need to worry about right now. So yeah, that's a tough question. You know, I could see it going both ways. I do see this is a silver lining to the current circumstances and the current environment. I do see a lot of people pushing back already about the virus and the mandates. Lockdowns aren't so much happening around here right now, but I feel like you could only poke the bear so much, right? And it seems like if they are going to try to throw this out there and just transition from, you know, one pandemic to the next, whether it be, some type of another virus that comes along or some type of hysteria surrounding climate change. It's going to be a tough sell. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, Lord knows there's enough people who are willing to just jump on board. But there's always that vocal minority that speaks out. And I think they are starting to kind of take back some of the narrative. Of course, that's impossible through social media. It's been very difficult. But just in day-to-day communications, and any type of means other than social media, it seems like people are starting to have enough.
Yeah. So you've been doing this for a long time. Even like a lot of us woke up during this pandemic, but you've been doing this for a very long time. When did your awakening take place?
So I grew up in the California Bay Area, which is very counterculture, also very liberal. But I always kind of grew up in that mindset of activism. I from my earliest years, when I was in high school, I was doing protests and different forms of activism in my community. There was people who were getting arrested for skateboarding in public areas. This is when I was just like, 14, 15. And it was a very small town. There was no place where you could skateboard legally. So, there was talk about building a skate park for us to skateboard in. I just had enough of all the bullying, intimidation. I think even some of my friends got arrested at one point. So I started in activism at that point, just doing stuff in my local area. That moved on into my early 20s. I was doing nonprofit work for a group called Forests Forever, just trying to preserve and save some of the forests in California. And during that time as well, maybe even a couple of years before that, but there were the Iraq war protests that were going on, and I was heavily into the anti-war protests during those times. So it's always been in my blood. But to answer your question, when I fully came online, as far as understanding what was completely going on, was probably more around 2011. I was paying attention to the Occupy Wall Street protests, and I think they were happening globally. I think they started in New York, but it sparked something in me. It made me kind of realize that there is something bigger going on. And we all kind of have that spidey sense, like something's not quite right. Something's kind of off in our society. We know there's corruption. I just didn't know exactly what it was. I couldn't put my finger on it. So at that time, I had just bought an iPad. They had just come out, and I was broke as a joke, but I had this iPad on me, and I was just taking in as much information as I could. I was watching all these videos, all these protests, and I kind of realized in the age of information, ignorance is a choice, right? And I had to make that decision that I wanted to educate myself. I wanted to be a sponge and absorb as much information as I could from both the left and the right. And of course, at that time, I couldn't tell you the difference between a Democrat or Republican. So I was kind of a blank slate going into this. Luckily, around the same time as Occupy Wall Street, I had found Ron Paul, and that kind of guided me as my North Star into more logic and reason, kind of understanding the culprit instead of asking for marginal change. I was more interested in striking the root. And that's what Ron Paul's ideology did for me. And all of a sudden, here I am supporting a politician. I never supported a politician before. I never voted before. All of a sudden, this politician's resonating with me. I felt like I was a cheerleader for him because I was like, wow, this guy is speaking my language. So yeah, it was right around 2011, 2012. Around 2012, I had started Police the Police, largely because I had seen so much police brutality going on during the Occupy Wall Street protests. And I also saw there was some online groups that were kind of doing similar things. That's one topic that I've always been very passionate about, police accountability stuff. So I started that in 2012. And about a year later, I had linked up with my now business partner and the Free Thought Project editor-in-chief, Matt Agorist. And we were both working at a website called Grow Foods Not Lawns. It was okay. It was kind of similar to Agorist type of content, but we kind of wanted to focus a little bit more on government accountability. And we realized the guy that we were working for was kind of, he was more interested in money than anything else. And we kind of felt like we could be doing what he was doing, but on our own terms and be doing it better. So yeah, it's been a wild ride since then. You know, it's been a roller coaster ride. We found a lot of success in the very beginning. I'm sure if you've done any type of research or listened to me speak on an interview before, you've heard, you know, in October of 2018, we ended up losing nearly 6 million fans due to censorship with Facebook and Twitter removing our pages and accounts on the same day. So yeah, it's been a roller coaster ride. We're still trying to recover and rebuild from losing all those fans. Unfortunately, when that happened, we had to fire our entire writing staff of 7 people. We had to let go our 2 social media team members. And now it's just me and Matt Agorist again, you know, bare bones, just taking it back to our roots. And it's been tricky. It's been rough. Yeah, we've been having some challenges getting back on our feet here. So.
Okay. This is a slightly tricky question. Are you kind of glad that COVID-19 pandemic happened, because it has clearly triggered a lot of individuals, especially a lot of young individuals, to finally wake up and go through an awakening process?
Yeah, it's a double-sided sword for sure. Yes, that is the silver lining, as I alluded to earlier in the conversation. I think that is something that's good. And I think a lot of the people that are, you know, waking up are younger generations. They're people who are going to be the future, you know, and I feel like a lot of the people who have latched onto these narratives are probably the boomer generations, and they'll be gone soon. So in that sense, it's, you know, I hate to sound so morbid, but in that sense, just with the passing of time, I feel like there will be a fundamental shift and change. If that happens in my lifetime, we'll see. You know, I've long said that this is going to be an intergenerational shift. So isn't something that's going to happen immediately. Although the internet has sped things up significantly, right? I mean, even in the past 20 years, I mean, we've learned so much. We've been able to look and question things and call out official narratives. So yeah, I wish it didn't happen under these circumstances, but sometimes it takes a global event like this to really change people's minds, to really have them be motivated into trying to understand what's going on. So, you know, while it is encouraging that people are starting to wake up and understand these things, we still have a huge monster ahead of us to fight. And that monster seems to be gaining steam by the day, with each and every one of these new variants that they tell us comes out, you know, that's only further traumatizing people, and, you know, continuing that cycle of fear, which makes people vulnerable and it makes them ask for more government and more policies and mandates that we know limits freedoms, but acts as a veneer for safety. So yeah, it's a double-sided, you know, there's two sides of the coin there for sure. But in many ways, you know, if the reason why we're having this conversation today is because of the COVID lockdowns and everything that happened with COVID, and that was, you know, your catalyst to kind of waking you up, then sure, man, you know, that's a good thing. Absolutely.
Yeah, it was a catalyst, especially for me. I think prior to this pandemic, I was more or less a sheep. I was like any regular person. I would believe everything, not everything necessarily. I was a libertarian even prior to the pandemic, but I didn't question the narrative to this extent. I didn't know that so many things that we earlier thought of as crazy conspiracy theories would turn out to be true now. Do you think mainstream journalism is dead since nobody watches them anymore?
It's getting pretty close to it. I mean, there is still an air of authority there, because of the whole fake news narrative that was rolled out in 2016, 2017. But yeah, you know, at our peak, at the Free Thought Project's peak, we were actually reaching more people than let's say a CNN or an ABC News or something like that. Of course, that varied per week, but there were some weeks where we were reaching up to, you know, 50, 60 million people in just a week. And if you look at their numbers, you know, that blows them out of the water. So yeah, I feel like they will eventually go the way of the dinosaur, but they still own the narrative right now. And again, there's still a lot of boomers, still a lot of the older generation who still kind of latch on to it. Of course, they suspect that there's, foul play. They suspect that there's some manipulation going on, but I do believe that they're shooting themselves in the foot. And the more that this goes on, the longer this goes on, the more they fact check us. They're digging their own grave to a certain extent. I don't know what the transition is going to look like, because to be honest with you, that transition had already started back in 2015, 2016. Some of us in the alt media were starting to become the new media. And I think that's part of the reason why they came out so aggressively with the whole Russia collusion, Russia narrative. We even got called, Russians in 2018 when we had our pages taken down. And that's when they rolled out the fake news narrative as well. Now, of course, that was Trump who helped usher that in. And I don't know if he realized he was being a useful idiot in that circumstance, but at the same time, he did a lot to help bring the whole fake news narrative online and discredit a lot of people like ourselves. I think he was using it in the opposite way, saying, the mainstream media is the fake news, but all of a sudden that term caught on and everybody was calling each other fake news. And the mainstream media kind of took back the mantle, if you will, during that time. And even now, if you look at the liberty circles online, most people don't share alt or independent media links. It's really frustrating for people like ourselves, but there's been a level of credibility that's been damaged by mainstream media, by the fact checking, by the fake news narrative. And so now, if you want to share any type of news or information online, people won't believe it unless it is a mainstream organization or institution and they have their name on it, like MSNBC or CNN or something like that, which completely contradicts almost everything that we know. But for whatever reason, there's kind of like this double think going on when it comes to mainstream media. So it's a tough time to be in the news business. I wouldn't recommend anybody who's interested in getting into it. Not right now. There's not a lot of money to be made. There's not a lot of footing for a foundation right now. And I feel like this will all be resolved eventually as more and more media outlets discredit themselves. But for right now, it's just a strange time to be in the media landscape. And I think we're both fighting, tooth and nail, both alt media and mainstream media, to have some leverage over one another. But I would say ultimately they're still winning because they have the money, they have the resources, they have the fancy suits, the expensive sets. To some people, that's all they need for credibility.
Did the big tech corporations give you a legitimate reason as to why they took your pages down?
Yeah, they did. So there was 3 reasons. Before I explain them, though, just remember there was 850 pages and accounts that were taken down at the same exact time, right? So we were just one of those 850. So we don't know which of these explanations actually applied to us, which applied to other people. It was just kind of this blanket statement. So they said, first of all, we were producing spam on their platforms, right? Which is kind of a strange one to me because that's such a subjective term. And throughout the years of the internet, that's been kind of used as a different umbrella term for different things. At one point in time, spam was getting a bunch of emails from somebody that you didn't want emails from, and they would spam you over and over again, right? Nowadays, it's turned into this term that is basically used by social media companies as a blanket statement for anything that they don't want on their sites anymore. So it's really hard to distinguish exactly what it is they're trying to say was spam. The second thing that they said was fake accounts. And it's ironic that they say that, right? Because now Instagram's actually asking people to make backup accounts and make second accounts or third accounts. You could actually go into the Instagram help section. At one point they were promoting it. I'm not sure if it's up anymore, but they're saying, are you bored with Instagram? Why don't you try another account, create a new account, follow new people? But back then in 2018 on Facebook, if you created multiple accounts, for some reason, that was something that was arbitrary. Is something that they put into place. Who knows what the actual reason was behind it, but I always tell people, like, okay, we're an online news business, right? These algorithms and AI on, let's say, Facebook, it's so bad. It's so poorly coded that you could get a 30-day ban for a picture of ET, which I did. I got a 30-day ban for a picture of ET, right? And I know it's absurd. We covered it. There's a story on the Free Thought Project about it. But these guys, they're so out there with the way that they arbitrarily enforce this stuff that you have to have a backup account. If you're going to be in business, they're going to arbitrarily give you a 30-day ban. Well, guess what? They're saying, well, for 30 days, I'm not going to be able to post any content on my page. My page is my business. I need another way to post on my page. So of course I had a backup account. It wasn't a fake account. I wasn't using some random name and some random picture. I was using my own ugly mug right here. I was using my first name and my middle name. I wasn't using my last name. It was Jason Earl. That was the name of the account. They took that down. I think one of our other social media guys had another backup account as well, just because that's the smart thing to do in this business. So to me, that's, again, it's arbitrary. It's selective enforcement. And then the third thing that they said was inauthentic coordinated behavior. And I know that's a bit of a mouthful. Basically, what that means is they thought we were so good at our job with networking, with sharing, with having other people, other organizations, other pages share information, that they basically thought we were click farms. They thought that we were somehow coordinating inauthentic behavior when we weren't. All of our information, all of our posts, and the reach that they got was completely organic. We had no reason to ever be associated with bot farms, fake accounts, anything like that. Our information that we were putting out there, it was resonating with people. We used to be a thriving organization. So there was, all three of these fall flat on their face. There's really no significant, there's no way that they could prove them. And unfortunately, some of the people, even within our own movement, had bought that whole narrative, that explanation, and didn't go much further, didn't stick up for us, didn't speak out about the whole purge that happened when all of our pages were deleted. And some of them, just actually parroted those same explanations. So it was a bit frustrating. But yeah, man, we're still out there. And since then, we've had 3 other pages taken down. We're on the Free Thought Project 4.0 now on Facebook. We're on Police the Police 3.0 because that as well was taken down. So, we're still fighting. Even, in fact, just a few days ago, we had our second Instagram account shadow banned in 2 months. So I had started another Instagram account after our first one, our largest one, 369,000 followers, was shadow banned. I started another one for our podcast. Less than a month later, I had built it to 14.6 thousand followers. Instagram took it down again. Actually, I'm sorry, I misspoke. They shadow banned it, which is almost the same thing. It's basically useless for 3 months. So I just had to start our third Instagram account. And the thing is, I'm not going to let these people win. I'm going to keep being a thorn in their side for as long as I can. If they're not going to play fair by their own rules, if they're going to break and bend their own rules, if they're going to selectively enforce these rules, then guess what? This is the community square. I'm not going to be silent, and I'm going to keep fighting back.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're just an honest man. You just say what you just see things as they are, and you say things as they are. And so do I, and so do a lot of liberty-minded people. But that offends a lot of people, especially in the mainstream. Are we extremists?
I would probably push back a little bit on what you said. I am an honest man. I call things as I see them, but I'm biased, as everybody is. Everybody has some type of internal bias. Even these, huge mainstream media sites that claim to be objective, they still have a bias. There's an internal bias. So we're very clear about this. We put our cards on the table. Our bias at the Free Thought Project: peace, liberty, and accountability. Everything that I post will be surrounded by those 3 things, or at least one of those 3 things, consistently. And that's the end of story. So yeah, I guess if that means being consistent with my views, with being intellectually consistent, with being morally consistent with my views, then maybe I am an extremist. And that's okay. I'm fine with that. because the truth is extreme to a lot of people that don't want to hear the truth. And, at the end of the day, it takes some time to get to where we're at, to our intellectual development. So if I was to tell somebody, maybe in passing, hey, like, I believe that the Department of Education should be abolished, they're going to be like, wow, you're crazy. That's insane. You're an extremist. But then if I tell them, well, the money for public education is extracted involuntarily through taxation, which means that you don't have any consent. You have to hand over your money, whether you like it or not, to a central government who's going to inefficiently use it. And they're also going to use that money to fund things like war, locking people in cages. Then they might understand, oh, okay, that's how it's funded. Huh, boy, like maybe I should think twice about that too. But to the average person on the street, to the average layman, you say, let's abolish the Department of Education. And, their mind's blown. They can't wrap their head around it. So I think a lot of these things, at least my views, start from first principle. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of that in society these days. These days, people say to themselves, subconsciously, of course, what can I do that's going to bring me the most amount of acceptance with my peers, with my social, with my family, my friends, and what's going to give me the least amount of grief? And by aligning with those ideas, they're going to be immune from any type of criticism, and they're going to be in the in crowd with the groupthink. Unfortunately, a lot of those norms that we have in society, they don't start from first principles. I don't believe in the initiation of violence. I don't think it's something that's advantageous for society. So if that makes me an extremist, then so be it. But I'm consistent, at least, about the way I think, about the information that I put out there, and with my moral beliefs.
Amen, man. Amen. Have you lost any friends because of your opinions?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, earlier this year, in like April, May, I lost my best friend. This guy has been somebody close to me my entire life. Not my entire life, since high school, since like sophomore year in high school. Lived together, communicated frequently, but he ended up buying the propaganda. And out of the blue, this is right when the vaccine started rolling out. He asks me, hey man, have you gotten vaccinated yet? And I kind of know he's more of like a normie in that sense. He's very much aligned with the mainstream. So I gently tried to explain to him, the numbers in my area aren't great. There hasn't been any long-term testing. I think I gave a few other explanations, and that basically wasn't good enough for him. He made it clear that he didn't want to continue talking to me. He didn't want to be friends. He didn't want to see me. So yeah, that was a tough one, man. That was a really tough one, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to waver. I'm not going to bend my beliefs or my morals. And, I believe consent is one of the only things that we really have still in this life. There's so much that they take from us. There's so much that we give. Consent is one of those things that we can never allow the mainstream to dictate, whether it be politicians or our peers or just the mainstream opinions in general. We always need to preserve the sanctity of consent. And the fact that my friend couldn't honor that or respect that tells me everything I need to know about him. I've known him for years. I love this guy. I bought him an Apple Watch for his birthday. I mean, this is somebody who I've like really like invested time and energy into. But at the end of the day, if he can't respect my choice of consent, then he's not a friend, So yeah, it's unfortunate, but
I think a lot of us have lost friends during this pandemic because of a difference of opinion. Earlier, there would be left versus right, or there would be division among friends because of race or religion. But this vaccinated versus unvaccinated debate has sowed so many seeds of discord within families and friends. Like, I remember an argument that I had with my friend earlier this year. I just asked a friend of mine, why do you wear a mask if you're coming from your house to the restaurant and we were all eating at a restaurant, and then you take off your mask and we're all sitting close to each other and eating? How does that help? Because you're wearing a mask when you're traveling alone, but here six of us are eating without masks, and he basically said, hey, you're behaving like an uneducated person. And
Right.
those things are very confusing, and I don't think that there is even a scientific justification for vaccine mandates or vaccine passports, because WHO and CDC says that even if you are vaccinated, you transmit the virus at the same rate as the unvaccinated. So what's the point? I don't get it.
Yeah, not to mention the, legions of doctors who don't fit within the scope of mainstream opinion, who've all said the vaccine's probably causing more variants and doing more harm than good. But I honestly believe, and this is me putting my conspiracy theory, my tinfoil hat on right now, of course, but if there was a way to psychologically manipulate people, the best way to do it is have them fight over something like a virus and have them turn on one another, whether it be friends, longtime friends, like I just explained, or family members. And it's a tough one, right? Because most of us are uneducated, especially before the pandemic. And we're not virologists, we're not doctors. So a lot of people, unfortunately, are at the mercy of, quote, experts. And a lot of these experts, you have to wonder, along with the media, how honest and accurate they're being. You also have to ask if there's a conflict of interest, if somebody's padding their pocketbook, if somebody's trying to, motivate them or influence them to think a certain way. So I think this is what they want. They want us to feel alone. They want us to be disconnected from each other. They want us, the divide and conquer mechanisms, the same ones that have been used for centuries. It's not too far out of that playbook, right? So it is something that I feel like a lot of people have experienced and dealt with, conflict with friends and family. And I think the best thing we can do is, look, my friend might not be a critical thinker. He might not be somebody who's questioning the official narratives, right? But he has his opinion. He might not be as intellectually developed as I am, or maybe vice versa. Maybe I have it all wrong. But we could still acknowledge that we're human beings. We could still acknowledge the bond that keeps us as friends and family without necessarily investing and getting involved with personal opinions about politics or viruses or pandemics. And I think that's the most healthy thing we could do. Sometimes you can have those conversations. You got to pick your battles, right? Sometimes you can have these conversations, but other times, if somebody is diametrically opposed from your perspective, let it be. There's plenty of other things in the world to talk about. I'd rather be friends with somebody and stay friends with somebody who I'm close to, and we have a different opinion on something, a certain topic. And yeah, maybe he thinks I'm an extremist, and maybe I think he's a sheep, but we're still friends. That hasn't divided us, and we can still see eye to eye on other topics and issues. So it's a tough one. I would say that doesn't apply to all circumstances. If somebody is pro initiation of violence, then maybe you don't have that relationship anymore. Maybe that's something that you do sever. But it's something, when it comes to this, I feel like there's so many people who are ignorant about these topics that it's almost like they're just parrots, right? They're just parroting what they hear. And that's the best they could do, because they haven't taken the time to understand how to critically think. They feel like they're righteous and just for having their perspectives, and they feel like you're grandma killer for having yours. But nobody's dying, right? There's no direct conflict. We're not fisticuffs. We're not fighting about it. Just let it be, So I know you didn't necessarily ask for that, but that's my suggestion for people who are experiencing friends and family who, don't necessarily share the same opinions as them.
So what is your opinion on Klaus Schwab and the Great Reset?
To be honest, I haven't done enough research on it. I know it's a term that I keep hearing. I know people like my friend Derek Bros have invested deeply into it. it's just escaped my purview. It's just outside of my radar. Obviously, I'm familiar with the concept and the idea, but I just haven't invested too much into it. There's so much going on right now. It's hard to have your finger on the pulse of everything. So
what are your goals with the Free Thought Project?
Well, we started as I mentioned, our focus is peace, accountability, and freedom. So, over the years, we've covered a bunch of different topics: government accountability, police accountability, drug war issues, censorship, 2A violations. But at the end of the day, more or less what we are is a third narrative combating the left and right narratives that are being put out there, the left and right misinformation, and just giving a different perspective on things. With that being said, this work is overwhelming. There is so much to be done on a daily basis. At one point, we were a well-oiled machine. At one point, we had the mechanism in place that we could put out 6 stories a day. We used to put out 6 articles every day, about 2 videos, about 2-3 videos every week, and then about 2 memes every day. Fresh memes, fresh articles, fresh videos. Content production, right? But since the purge, like I said, we've been more in rebuilding mode. So right now, we're just trying to get back on our feet. We're trying to rebuild, have some money in our buffer and our savings so we can actually hire some other people, excuse me, and bring them on board to help with writing, to help with video and content production. There's only so much I could do by myself. I spend countless hours doing this type of work, a little bit less now since the new baby was born, but I work 7 days a week. I do this because I love it, because I care, because I'm passionate about this. Right now, we just need the funding. We need our supporters to step up to the plate. And yeah, let's delegitimize mainstream media. Let's get alt media and independent media going again. We are the Liberty community's news source. Liberty community needs to step up and start helping us get the funding that we need. We have the experience, we have the motivation, we've proven ourselves over the years. So as you could tell, I'm a little frustrated, a little bitter, because there's only so much we could do. The way we used to get money was through ad revenue. The ad game has completely changed now. Not even including all the censorship that's happening, but Facebook and Google own 72% of the ad world now. If you're on their blacklist, you're not going to be making money through those entities. So really, it's up to us to find different revenue streams, and we've been working on that. But we're also trying to put out the content that we know our audience cares about and resonates with. So it's a lot of work. Now, we could sidestep that whole process of trying to find different revenue streams if we just had our fans and followers step up to the plate and make donations or subscriptions. So right now, that's been my main focus for about the past year and a half. It sucks because we're not making much progress. I beat myself up over it daily, but we need to have some more of a foundation so we can bring on the team that we need to continue doing this work. So that's more or less the focus right now. I know it's not super glamorous. And like I said, we are working on some stuff. We're working on a book behind the scenes right now. We're trying to shift our website to a different platform that should be advantageous for us. But yeah, I'm personally going to be writing a book soon. But otherwise, the day in, day out grind is just content creation and trying to rebuild the Free Thought Project.
Right. So you just said that you work 7 days a week. What do you work on mostly?
Well, it's yeah, I mean, I could, it's tricky to doing the type of work that we do. So again, just the content creation itself, just to make a meme, let's say, if I'm going to make a meme, it takes, upwards of sometimes 10, sometimes 20, sometimes 45 minutes just to find the right image for a meme. If we're going to cover a news article, if it's not an exclusive story, well, that takes time too. I got to be news hunting. I got to keep my finger on the pulse. I got to see what news stories are trending, what's going to resonate with our audience, try to find some type of angle or spin that's going to be interesting for our audience to kind of make it fresh and give it our liberty perspective on it. And yeah, I mean, social media in itself, that's an entire game of I think we're on 15 different social media platforms altogether. Maybe it's even 16 or 17 now, including the new Ben Swan platform. But all these things take time: scheduling posts, sharing posts. I mean, it's a never-ending task, and really, that the sky's the limit when it comes to this type of work. It's not so much like, hey, I've done my work for the day, I get to chill now. It's like, no, I could keep going 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There is no end to this work. This work is continual. So yeah, it's tricky, but I at least invest 4 to 5, 6 hours every morning. Later in the afternoons, I kind of do more of the creative side of things with the memes and videos and stuff. But yeah, it's a lot of work, man. It's a ton of work.
Yeah. And you're also the founder of Police the Police. How do you think we can reduce police brutality and increase police accountability?
Great question. Yeah, I'm glad we're touching on that. And yeah, that's another thing I failed to mention. Well, we're not just doing one organization, right? I think we have 2 organizations, and there's plenty of government accountability information, and then even more police accountability information that surfaces almost on a daily basis. So with that being said, how do we fix or at least minimize police violence in society? Well, I could tell you one thing. It's not through protests, and it's not through reform. Okay. This I know for sure. People have been protesting police in this country since 1865. Excuse me. I got that date wrong. 1886. They're not even close. I don't know how I mixed that up. There was a Haymarket riot back in 1886, which was a police brutality protest. It started initially as police brutality protests. So if we've been protesting police brutality for 50 years, why in the world is it going to just change overnight over one incident with George Floyd in these global protests, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense. I get it. People are upset. They don't know how to express themselves. Protests are a great visual representation of people who are just as frustrated as you, people who want to see change, people who want to see less police violence in society. I totally get that. I'm on board for protests, but believing that it's going to be the catalyst to implement real change is just short-sighted. So the libertarian view, the libertarian perspective is we decentralize. Right now, law enforcement in most countries, including this one, claim to be a legal monopoly on the use of violence. That creates a lot of problems because right now, police are funded through taxation. Taxation isn't something that is voluntary. It's extracted from us. Therefore, this money that funds police, it means that they have basically an unlimited supply of taxpayer funds. That doesn't really bode so well for incentive or motivation, right? That doesn't necessarily make police be an institution that's going to be accountable. In the market, if a business, an agency, a firm, if they're doing something that's undesired in society, we take our money elsewhere. We decide to not continue funding that. But when it comes to a monopoly, a government monopoly that's funded by taxation, we don't have any choice. They're going to continue to be funded. Not only that, we have no way of actually knowing whether or not they're actually using our tax dollars efficiently. Instead, they've perverted the institution of law enforcement. They've made it into a revenue generation scheme through quotas, through victimless infractions. That's not protecting and serving the public. What we need are protection and security services that are third party, that communities can voluntarily fund through their own means, and that they, with institutions and firms that they believe are going to be the best for their community. So as an example, let's say you and your community, your neighborhood, voluntarily hires company A. If company A does something that you find to be unscrupulous, undesirable, let's say they stop one of your family members, they rough them up a little bit, they question them, we don't have to fund that company A anymore. we could come together as a community and be like, hey, look, this guy violated my rights. He invaded my privacy. He didn't listen. He was unprofessional. He was an egotistical hothead. Guess what? You fire them. You and your community fire them. So basically, essentially, we're just taking the power back. We're not allowing government to use their discernment to be that middleman and incrementally make very small, minute changes like, oh, well, maybe we'll ban a chokehold this year. Okay, but what about all the other egregious violent violations of rights and liberties that you participate in? Well, those we'll just have to deal with because, hey, we need police, right? Well, yeah, I would argue we do need security and protection services in society, but just not by a monopoly. So the answer again is decentralize. Another word for that is to privatize. Of course, a lot of people are very triggered by the word privatization. That it's like a dog whistle. So I would say probably to not use that word if you're trying to talk to a leftist or somebody who's a statist. But at the end of the day, that's what it is. It's privatizing security and protection services.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Why do I need the government as a middleman and then hold monopoly over violence? Correct. I would rather have a private police, or I would want my community and my neighborhood to start our own cooperative police. And hey, if I don't like the company that's providing the police, I could just give him a bad rating or a bad review and just replace him with another company.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, the market is the solution. The market is our path out of all of this. And I know people are skeptical, people are hesitant, they hate hearing about how the free market is a solution. But look, there's nothing that the market can't do better, more efficiently, more effectively, and with more accountability than government provided services can do. Again, because of the taxation, the format of taxation totally distorts all original intentions. So, if people are handing me money, why would I ever change my negative behaviors? If you're going to continue to fund me, what incentive do I ever have to change? And that's the problem. And we're never going to fix the problem just by groveling to politicians, begging them for some type of insignificant, very minor shift or change in policy or law. It's not going to change things. We've been trying for 150 years now. We have to start being more realistic.
Yeah. Is taxation theft?
Absolutely, my friend. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. You want me to go through that?
I think I would like you to go through that, although I already agree with you for the benefit of the audience.
Sure. Yeah. Well, even if, let's say, taxation was to fund something beneficial for society, something virtuous, something that we could all agree on as being a net plus. If it's taken without consent, again, there's that magic word. If it's taken without consent, then it's going to be immoral. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be spent ineffectively. There's going to be so many problems that it creates. Nobody knows how to better spend your money than you. So just as an example, you have a neighbor who comes over and knocks on your door, right? And like, hey, so my daughter's just finishing high school. We're going around the community and the neighborhood today, and we're asking for everybody to pitch in $1,000. Well, what if you don't want to pitch in that $1,000? Well, points to the guy behind him, the big burly looking guy, and he flashes a gun at you. Okay, well, do you really do I still have a choice, or is this something that I have to do? Well, it's for my college, my daughter's college fund. So it's something that's going to benefit society ultimately, right? Yeah, I guess it might be, but I'm still being held at, by coercion at the barrel of a gun to pay for it. So I guess I'll pay up, but I don't really want to, and that's exactly the position of taxpayers. Unfortunately, it can't be moral if and at the end of the day, that's how these laws are backed up. This is how taxation is enforced, with violence, with the barrel of a gun. So if I tried to not pay my taxes, I would get a letter in the mail If I continued to refuse to pay taxes, I'd probably get another letter in the mail, but eventually men with guns would show up at my home. Eventually I'd be put into a cage if I refused to continue paying taxes. And if I was to defend myself, if I was to push or assault or aggress on these agents of the state who came to my house, they claim the legal right to kill me, to use lethal force to enforce these laws. So this is coercion. This is violence. And at the end of the day, it's taxation is theft. It's extortion more accurately, but it is theft.
And that leads us to the absurdity of democracy. There are a lot of people who will argue that, well, most taxpayers are okay with the paying taxes. What's your problem? Why are you so different?
Yeah. Great book by Hans Hermann Hoppe called Democracy, the God That Failed. And democracy is nothing more than might makes right? It's mob mentality. It's groupthink with dangerous consequences. So just because 51% of the population agrees to something, it doesn't mean that it's moral or right to force the other 49% of the population to adhere to that. And that's at the end of the day, that's the bottom line. Now we could talk about how democracy is used as a facade, as this talking point by governments, because we always have to preserve the sanctity of democracy. Democracy is this thing that's held up on high esteem throughout governments and society, because ultimately it's the best that they could do to try to keep us tax slaves, us tax cattle in line, which is to offer us participation in our own enslavement. Well, you get to vote at least, right? So therefore you should be happy. Yeah, but okay, I shouldn't be voting on, choice between A and B. One guy's a warmonger, another guy's attached to big banks and corporations or whatever. Like, that's not much of a choice at all now, is it? So there's lots of problems with democracy. And again, at the end of the day, government, the institution itself, is funded by violence. The backbone of government is violence. I believe we could do better in society. I believe that the foundation of society should be peace. I believe that there's other peaceful ways to fund programs, services in society without having to point guns at people. Is that crazy? Well, does that make me an extremist? Yeah, I mean, I guess it does. But look, I'm also being consistent with my values and beliefs. And a lot of other people feel the same way. In fact, there's much more intellectuals and scholars that talk about this stuff at, great lengths. If you go to the Mises Institute or check out Mises on YouTube, the Mises Academy, Mises Institute, there's so many smart, brilliant minds basically laying out the blueprints and groundwork as to how we could be in an actual free society. They say we're free in the States, they're always telling us how important it is to vote and democracy. But again, it's all funded through violence. The whole apparatus, the whole house of cards is based on violence. I think we could do better than that.
Do you think we can ever win?
Absolutely. And we're going to win. Oh, yeah. No, I mean, like I was mentioning earlier in this conversation, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And it's going to be an intergenerational shift. We might not be here to see it. Now, people like you and me, we're going to help usher it in. Absolutely. The more conversations like this we're having. But as I said, we're currently in the age of information right now. We've been in the age of information for probably a good 15 years or so with the advent of the internet and its popularity, of course, because internet's been around for a while, but it takes people to actually make it valuable. What I strongly believe is we're moving into the age of accountability. And I've talked about this a few times on different podcasts and interviews, but with the internet, with the blockchain, it's going to become harder and harder to be lied to. The corporate gatekeepers of the media no longer have the control that they once did. So we're exposing them one post at a time, one meme at a time, one article at a time. And people, like I said, are starting to get it. They're starting to understand what's going on, especially the younger generations. So as time goes on, we're going to be leaving the age of information and moving into the age of accountability. I mean, mark my words, it's going to happen. And maybe even so much so that it might be a little overwhelming for some people, because some people like that anonymity and the randomness of being in a world without cameras everywhere. And being online is just some random fake name or something. But I do believe that it is going to ramp up pretty significantly. And I think ultimately the consequences of that are going to be mostly positive. There'll probably be some things that we don't necessarily like with rights violations, privacy violations. But at the end of the day, I think it's going to be more for the top down, more for the institutions that are the ruling class, more so than us.
Are you looking at upcoming technology in a positive way or in a negative way? Because there are technologies like facial recognition cameras that are being installed by governments all around the world. There is the metaverse. There's big tech that is investing in companies that's mining private data. But at the same time, there's also technology that helps liberty-minded people like blockchain and 3D printers. So, are you positive about this, or are you paranoid about upcoming technology?
It's a mixed bag, man. I mean, just like the firearm, technology is ultimately a tool. It just depends on how we use it. I mean, right now we have some bad actors who are very much running things like Facebook, Twitter, Google, Amazon. I personally love technology. I've always been a technology guy. I grew up with computers, video games. I mean, I own a smartwatch, all these things. I don't personally have much skepticism about 5G and whatnot. So I try to embrace it because ultimately that's the only thing you really can do, right? Especially because of the 80-20 rule. Once 80% of the population adopts something, it's very rare that 20% is going to ever hold on and keep that, tradition or illusion going. And point in case is you don't see horse and buggies on the streets anymore, right? Like, I mean, we've all adapted to cars. So I am skeptical. I think it depends on which actors and what they're trying to provide. If we're talking about Facebook, well, guess what? They're digital pimps that, pimp out our information. If we're talking about Google, well, what doesn't Google have their dirty hands in at this point? I mean, it's just about everything. So I think it's up to us. It's up to the people. It's up to organizations like, I mean, there's so many of them, got a space on their name right now. Yeah, I mean, there's going to be third parties, organizations that step up to the plate to try to continue to hold these people accountable. And just to say, that all technology is bad is a blanket statement. And I try not to make those whenever possible. And to say it's all going to be good is the same. I mean, I think there's going to be good and bad.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have one final question for you. And this is not a political question, it's more of a philosophical question. What do you think is the purpose of life?
It's a good one, man. Yeah. I think that's up to the individual. It's such a tough one to say. I personally live my life trying to do good. I try to be a moral person. Does that mean that I don't make mistakes sometimes? Does that mean that, I've done unethical things? Of course, like who hasn't, right? But the purpose of life, nobody knows. Nobody knows. And I think there's not enough people who question that, and that they ask what the fuck we're doing here, because nobody really knows. So if that's the case, then just try to create as least amount of, damage, and, try to be tolerant of people, try to just, I don't know, keep positive vibes, man. Cause who knows why we're here? Try to enjoy it. Try to enjoy the ride a little bit, and, yeah, the least amount of suffering that I could contribute to, the better. I'm not trying to have anybody suffering in this life, whether it be people or animals or whatever. I mean, I'm a longtime vegetarian as well. So who knows, man? I don't know if I have an answer to that. It's subjective. I think it's subjective to everybody.
I was going to let you go, but now you said I have to ask you a few more questions. Why
Sure,
did you
man.
choose to be a vegetarian?
I don't know if I necessarily chose it. So I started on that journey when I was in like, I think a freshman or sophomore in high school. And much like the waking up process to a lot of people with the world around them, I kind of woke up to the food industry and realized that, hey, like I'm just doing this because my parents do it and because their parents did it. Like, why do I eat meat? Why do I eat animals? Why do I think that's normal? What is in the meat? How are they farmed and raised? What's in half my food? Shit, I don't know. I mean, it's like maybe I should start paying attention. Maybe I should at least try to figure out what factory farms are. Maybe I should try to understand some of the chemicals and hormones that they put into animals and the meat processing and stuff like that. So I think that was a big part of it. Again, I'm not trying to participate in the suffering of any being. I don't want to eat a cow that's been suffering in a factory farm in a cage that, it could barely move in for its entire life. I mean, to me, that's not something that I would take a lot of pride in. And some people would even make the argument that, that stress, that fear that animal has absorbed, it gets transferred through the meat. It gets transferred into your own psyche and your own mental well-being. I don't know if I necessarily go that far, but and again, there's the argument about the environment too. I mean, how much impact does factory farms or large scale meat production have? I mean, there's a lot, it's significant. I know there's arguments to be made about, the same with eating vegetarian for sure. And of course, the whole push to have people eat less meat. I'm sure there's propaganda involved with that. I'm sure there's some type of bias and skew that's going on. But to me, I tried to eat meat again probably about 10 years ago, and I just naturally gradually went back to being a vegetarian. It just feels better for me, health wise, conscious wise, mostly those two.
Yeah. Are you a very spiritual person?
I probably used to be before I spent so much time online. These days, not so much anymore, although I do love connecting with nature. I love being outside. I'm not so much a religious person, but I do try to indulge in understanding my existence as we just touched on, and I think a lot of that revolves around spirituality. So to a certain degree, yeah, I can't say that I practice it actively and tap into that frequently, but I would say, yeah, mostly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jason, for being
You're
on
welcome,
my
brother.
podcast. This was a pleasure.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Let's do it again.